turn to our panelists. I would like to introduce our guest artist, Carl Bauer. And in addition to Carl, we're very, very fortunate to have two of his subjects, or the subjects who are part of this exhibition, present with us. We have Palin and we have Lizette. So please join me in welcoming all of them coming here to serve us. I think together they will provide an opportunity to shed light on what is very much a collaborative project. And to have the courage to come here and talk about the experience of it is, we're very, very, very grateful. I really see this as a kind of multi-layered project, or multifaceted. There's the work of the artist and the origins that came from the idea of the artist, and then we have the participants who bravely agreed to participate, and then we have the audience who also brings a layered meaning to this. And I think we will all come away a lot more knowledgeable and feel like we have had a sense of getting inside the project and sort of revealing the depth of it. So I have questions for our panelists, but I also encourage you to think about questions that you might have or comments that you might have that you have access. You have access right here to those who made this project possible. So let me introduce Carl a little bit further. Carl is a photographer exploring intimate portrayals of private experience through both documentary work and portraiture. Frequent themes include perceptions of beauty, coping with adversity, personal identity within prevailing social structures, and the relationship between trauma, shame, and isolation. His images are made with the intention that the medium not be part of the message, but rather a transparent conduit between the subject and the viewer. A finalist for the Pulitzer Prize, his work has been exhibited at the Georgia Museum of Art, the Phoenix Art Museum, the Annenberg Space for Photography, and now Blue Sky Gallery. So again, please join me in welcoming our panelists. So Carl, let's start with you. We've had many conversations over the past few days about this project, and I'd like to start at the beginning. So if you want to tell us a little bit about your personal experience that led to the idea that seems a bit removed from the past work that you've done, or maybe your commercial work, your photojournalistic work. So if you'd like to share a little bit of your personal story and the origins of this project.
If you would phrase that, would you, versus would you like to,
would you
that
like
might be a
to?
little bit different. When you talk about origins, sometimes there are very specific marks, and sometimes when you're trying to find the origin of something, your perspective changes looking back, and you might distill patterns. I can't say it's based on any one thing, but yes, I did have an experience the last several years where I had a former girlfriend who ended up stalking me for a long period of time. I'd get taps on the window, peeking through my windows. I would walk outside of the building in the city somewhere, and within a few seconds I would recognize whether her car was parked on the adjacent block. I'd go into a large parking lot somewhere, and I can't find my own car, but I would see her car, a few hundred yards away within a couple seconds. So I was living in this sort of 24/7 hyper-awareness. And yet, at the time, I ended up going to Chile, and I was studying, and I heard a tap at the window. I looked up, and there was this face. So she was very persistent. And throughout this time, I didn't really tell people about this. I started to recognize that my life was something on, it seemed absurd, and I was sort of ashamed that I was living the kind of lives that I usually read about. I didn't feel like I was working as a freelance journalist in Washington at the time, and I felt like if anyone knew what my personal life was like, they would think I was too unstable to trust with an important assignment or sending me on the road somewhere for a week or so. And so I couldn't tell any of those people. And so I held all this very, very closely. After a while, I not only had the fear that someone would find out, but if they did find out, the follow-up, I was afraid of the follow-up question, how long has this been going on? And to say it had been going on for such a long period of time would be even harder to explain. And so I began to see, maybe not so much at the time, but later, that cycle of shame and isolation, and how when we think no one could possibly understand the situation we're in, because we don't know anyone like that. Because anyone else who had such a situation, they might also keep quietly and privately to themselves. As time went on, I recognized that I was starting to look at people in stoplights, out in the public, wherever. And I was just intensely curious at what they were carrying inside of them. Because I had become really, really good at maintaining a facade. This completely opaque shield where no one could know what was taking up about 90% of my mental energy. And it made me wonder. And at some point, I just wanted an excuse to ask people. And this project, I think, the origins of it were just that intense curiosity and need to know. Partly out of a pure sense of curiosity, but also, I think in some ways, in hindsight, knowing other people were dealing with other things completely hidden from others made me forgive myself a little more for that time period.
And so then you conceived of this project, and how did you actually go about finding your subjects? What was your methodology of reaching out and finding all of these people who were willing to not only be photographed but share their stories? So how did that, and how difficult or how easy was it?
Asking a question about private fears, it's an intensely intrusive question. It's not the kind of thing where I think you could approach people on the street and have a real answer. I would never answer that question. And I think, having a ratio of 999 rejections to one person who would talk to me is probably more than I could take. I found most of these guys online. And I think that helps. There's something about the question coming from an anonymous source and being able to answer it anonymously, even though there may be some future contact, makes it a little bit easier. I used to travel a lot in my work, and late night airline flights, and I was inevitably sitting next to somebody who felt like they could talk to me, and they would tell me things, and they would tell me things that no one close to them knew, that their husbands, their wives, their partners, no one else knew about this. And I was safe because I was a stranger. It was safe to tell me these things because there was no blowback or threat of blowback. I was safe because they would most likely never see me again. And I think something similar happens to getting that query online, and certainly I'd love to ask you guys what your feelings on this were. So it's almost like you're taking something that you can't share with anyone and you're kind of releasing it out into the ether. And then this guy writes back and says, okay, would you like to meet for coffee? And you're thinking, oh shit. Oh God, now what? And so, these brave people met up with me anyway. But that's how I find people. And I think there are two factors. One is at least the initial anonymity, where I am an abstraction. And I think the second is it gives people time to actually contemplate the question. And a lot of people told me, I saw this and I was thinking about it for days until they wrote back. And it gives them time to focus and be very introspective about it, and also distill a lot of things. And I think, the process of actually having to ask the question about the fears forces you to define what they are in language. And I think there's something helpful in that. Because so oftentimes the things that give us anxiety, they're swirling around us, and it's this muddled mess, and it's a cloud, and it's paralyzing. Having to actually write a very, very direct answer to the question not only helps to define it, but also removes a lot of clutter from things that you thought were related, but maybe are not part of it. So I think just naming the fear can be a very early step to overcoming it.
Well, I think for Lizette and Palin, this is about fear. This is about the fear that, and the fears that Carl spoke or asked you to speak of. But I see that your participation was a matter of turning those fears into courage. Probably not only for you, but for most of those who participated. So I'm curious, as we all are, what compelled you to agree to meet for that coffee and participate, and not only to have that courage to do that, but then also to be photographed, to make it very visible, and have to write down those statements as Carl's talking about. So curious about what was it about the project that drew you in?
Where did it go? Yeah, so as Carl stated, it was through online. I think it was through Craigslist. And I was in the gig or the artist section. I had just moved into my own place from a not so great relationship, so I'm sure others understand that's sometimes a rough place. I was kind of pulling myself apart from that world and creating my own, and was just in a really rough spot. And I was kind of just reaching at that point for community. I was in Denver, and I was just kind of trying to find another gig to supplement the massage practice I was trying to work on. And I saw this question and it kind of stopped me in my tracks. And I was all alone in my first very own apartment by myself. And I had a lot of time at that point to just be oh, what is my deepest fear? What is holding me back? And I had a lot of time to just ask myself that question, endless hours of space, which I hadn't had for a really long time for my previous relationship. And that's what compelled me, I think, was just I was in a rough spot, and I was wow, it's kind of a shining light to be able to answer that, and to admit to someone who was anonymous what my struggles were was a lot easier than trying to go call a counselor and be so this is all the stuff, and then you have to see if you like them or not, all that kind of thing. And I was I don't want to do that. And this was an easier way and creative. But I didn't think it was gonna come of anything. I don't know, Craigslist is a crazy place where, crazy. And I didn't really know who this person was, but it was a relief to be able to put it down into words. And then he actually messaged me back. So when he said that, I was just laughing. And when we met, that's when my world was kind of like, what? Like, it was just such a different kind of approach to that question or that space, like a stranger. And Carl is so humble. Like, when you say people just told you things, I don't know if it's just that you were a stranger either, though. Like, when I actually met you, there's just something about you that's very comforting, very like honest, very simple, and like no judgment. You had the best questions. I think we talked for like 4 hours at this coffee shop. Maybe it wasn't quite that long, but that's what, I think that's what you do with everyone, but it drew me in even more, and asking those questions and getting to have a conversation about my hidden fears, which have to do a lot with mental health, and getting to talk with you about that out loud was, it was like the most endearing counseling session I've ever had. But it felt like with a friend. And there was no like, well, let's try to fix you. Like, it wasn't like that. I just got to be me and come at it from a point that wasn't like I was a DDSM or, like a diagnosis in a book or something like that. Just made me feel like a human. Just like being human with someone else who was human. That was really important. Yeah. Okay, stop talking now. Back to the mic.
Okay. Also Craigslist over here. Great and crazy place. So for me, sequentially, it was kind of the same reason why I was under the gigs and folder, whatever you want to call it. But so I got into modeling a little bit, and someone told me like, hey, check out Craigslist for any local ads. Sometimes they're genuine. So there I am looking, and I see Carl's post, and I'm like, oh my God, this is exactly what I needed more. Because the reason I started modeling or wanting to get into that, industry is because I have never been, throughout the years, I never fit the standard of what a model should be. Like, I've never been a size 2, I've always been heavier, and then I became anorexic, and then I still wasn't a size 2, I was a lot smaller than that. So I'm like, I don't have the curves, I am not sexy, I am not all these things, but I want to be that person to influence others. I want everybody and every physical body to be accepted, to feel powerful, to feel included, welcoming, comfortable. So then when I saw his post, I'm like, shut up, this is my fear. Like, I guess I tackled my fear straight on too, within like, I hate my body. Don't like anything about it. I have nightmares about it, but yet I'm gonna be behind or in front of a camera and show the world my body. That doesn't make any sense. So when there's an explanation to go along with it, that to me was just so deep and so moving that I knew I needed to do this, not only for me, but to help others get to that point, because what a relief it was to find out that not only me, but other people had this hidden fear, had this, the same illness, per se, that I have. Like, if I had someone to guide me along the way, if I had someone to simply ask me, like, hey, what's going on? Like, what a different world, like, what a different couple of years I would have had. So to me, it wasn't like, oh, should I do this? It was a must. Like, I needed to do this. And through helping others, I helped myself. So I think that's, yeah.
Thank you. So it's really a collaboration, right? This project, and I'm curious about the actual, like, the photo sessions. Like, what was that like, and what did that? So you agreed to kind of come on board and be part of this, and were drawn in by the idea and by speaking with Carl. But explain maybe a little bit about what that was actually like, and actually having that photo taken, and then seeing it here, on the wall. So, what was the photo session experience like? Was it what you expected, and how did you, Carl, get them to sort of illustrate the statements through the gesture of the pose?
That was a two-part question. Who goes first?
Yeah. So the first is about what the photo sessions were like for all of you.
Sorry.
First it was the meeting via the internet and the anonymity, and then I met Carl, and I was just like, wow, this is a genuine person, this is a genuine project, and I was completely on board after that, obviously. And then Carl was like, okay, so we're gonna find a time to shoot and a place, and of course, in my mind, because I've done senior photos or something, I was like, okay, like, I'm by the governor's mansion, like, the trees are pretty, the space looks good, and that's not at all what this is about. It's not, not at all. When I read the thing that you just read in it being the medium not being a part of really what you're looking at and what you're seeing, it's just an avenue to, get this across. That's very much what the thing was like. So he just came to my house, and I had just moved in, so my place was very barren in a sense. And my room I was making a lot of craft projects at the time, so I had paper making stuff all over the place. And my room was very, very simple. And so, when we went in there, I mean, this was like 4 years ago, so some of it is a little hazy, but it was so comforting. It was just like talking to a longtime friend, and we were just doing, this thing. He came with all of his lights. I didn't look you up right away. I mean, I did, and I just trust my intuition about people. Like, okay, this is a good person, and you can tell instantly when you like get to talk with Carl for a little bit. But he then came with like all of like the serious like camera lights and stuff, and I was like, oh, this is serious. And also like, okay, I guess we're definitely going outside because my apartment is not the place for this. Because I had a very aesthetic idea of it still. That's what photography was to me. It was, a creative expression, but it was aesthetic in a way. And I had this very like perfect image of what that might look like, even though it wasn't very cohesive. And then we just got to talking, and he was like, no, like, let's just do it in here, it's perfect. And it was so simple, and I was kind of like, okay, like, yeah, I guess that makes sense. And then we just talked. The process was very cathartic, actually. It felt like a meditation. We talked through, if you see my photo, my hand is open. And the process itself, I remember like keep having to being drawn back into the moment and being present, and that's what I feel like you were really trying to draw out of me, was like get me back in the moment and to like really be with what that fear was, because I think I was disassociating quite a bit and like just like, no, like, I don't know. Even though I wanted to do this project, it was a little hard to actually be there with it. But in your presence, I think that I just kind of felt very, very comforted enough to be able to get into that space. I mean, when I look around at these photos, I'm like, oh yeah, like, like her, like she's like, has so much emotions, and that's kind of what was in that process. And then through it, I actually felt like I got to let go of my fear. Like the talking was a process, but then this was the physical, like somatic version of letting that release actually like through my tissues, that opening of my hands. I just felt like all of my energy kind of like flow out of me. I've never had a photo session like that before. I don't know, I was like, this is not a photo session. This was not a photo session. It wasn't like that. And yeah, I honestly think like this was a catalyst for me. That after that session, I really had like some mind-blowing, like expansive kind of realizations that led me to leave Denver and actually move here to Portland, which is very circular now that I'm here again, which I love. But yeah, I think like that photo session was like the best, like the best therapy session I've ever had in my life. But it was somatic in a way. Like I got to release it. And Carl like walked me through this process of like a meditative state where I really got to get into my feelings and yeah, feel that emotion with someone else too, which I had actually never done before. So that was my experience.
I can answer the second part.
Okay. Go for
You want
it.
to pass or?
No, go for
Go
it.
for it.
I don't remember the specific
I
question.
know, I don't know if I do either.
We are in that meditative state.
Yeah, I know, I would.
There is no
Let's
doubt.
see, well, I think from your perspective, you know, the collaborative process, so even, you know, taking what Palin has talked about, and like, did you have that experience, or what, you know, what was it on your end, and how did you go about, not only with Palin and Lizette, but with everyone of trying to draw them out in taking their pictures?
Yeah. It's obviously different for me because I'm guiding this. There isn't a specific place I'm trying to. I don't come to these shoots with an idea of what the photograph looks like. I don't come with an idea, even emotionally, of where that should be. Yes, I think about the statement, what they wrote to me. I think about the conversations we've had over 1, 2, 3 hours. But there isn't anything specific. I work commercially. I do a lot of photography where I go into a place and, you know, I have so many minutes to set up, and then someone who has a really, really strong sense of self-esteem, or certainly doesn't lack it, walks into a room and says, okay, where do you want me? And in those circumstances, because there is sort of a specific kind of image that whoever hired me wants me to make, I'm trying to basically avoid failure, which is not the same thing as doing something good. And just because of time constraints, very frequently, and it's not something I'm proud of, but I end up sometimes taking pictures that I brought with me in my head, and then just manifesting those. Everything around this series, from the way I meet people to the fact that we talk and it's open-ended, and we'll take the pictures another day. Everything is calculated to be completely opposite from the methodology used for those shoots when I go home and hate myself as a photographer. And so, yes, I'm giving people permission sometimes to let go of things they've been holding. They're giving me permission to be the best that I can be without the constraints under which I normally operate. And I think I may have told both of you, I don't know, but sometimes I tell people about, you know, these circumstances that I just described. And you know, when I come to take your picture, there's a good chance I'm going to be walking around in circles, not knowing where to begin, except I don't have to mask it. Hating the light, hating everything, having no clue as to where to begin. And I need you to give me permission to look like I've never made a photograph in my life. And to trust me. And they did. In terms of the dynamic, once things start moving, once we kind of find a thread to follow, I'm not trying to push them towards a certain point. The only thing I'm asking and sensing is this authentic? Sometimes I'll notice that people seem to either, I think Palin mentioned a couple times, is like, sort of disassociating from that process. It's like, you're not here. You need to come back. Sometimes people try to be helpful, or they try to either project an emotion or do something that they think will help the photograph. And I have to cut them off. And it's like, you're posing, you're acting, you're projecting. We're not doing that. So it's, I think it's a combination of patience and tough love sometimes. Because for me, the most important thing about any of these pictures, whether it's in the process of making them or having a ton of images and deciding what makes sense, is the authenticity. And I feel like these guys have gone out on an incredible limb to share this thing with me, and then to be photographed on top of that is a tremendous act of courage. And I feel like there's a covenant there. And my end of that is to at least make a picture that is at least worthy of that authenticity. I'm not trying to mirror what they wrote or reflect or amplify it. I can't do that. And they're not meant to be didactic. But the authenticity of the moment, the authenticity of, I want to be able to bring this picture back to them and say, never mind if you like the way you look or anything else. Does this feel right? And that's my litmus test. And everything from the way we meet, to the conversations we have, to how I operate the camera, everything is designed with a one focus. And it's almost impossible to say this in language without sounding a little self-delusional, but I'm trying to make an honest image. That's the only goal I have at that point, and I hope that these live up to them.
Great. Well, would you like to share your
Sure.
perspective?
Okay, so like Palin said, it was not a photo shoot. I have been in a few, and this was not that. To give you an analogy, take a movie and a documentary. So the movie's a photo shoot. This was a documentary. This was the memoir. This is our story. So when Carl was telling me, okay, this can be you, this can be raw, I'm here thinking, so you want me to let my guard down. You want me to be vulnerable. Nope, not today. But how I responded, I was like, yeah, sure. But yeah, so my experience was a little different than Palin's. Was it at all like meditation? No, not at all. But therapeutic, yes. Carl asked me the right questions. He made me feel. And what I usually feel on my own, and what I usually see in the mirror on my own, I was sharing with him. And I realized now that I was sharing it with someone of how ashamed I felt. Like, I don't even know why, but I felt so ashamed to be going through this that, like, I'm worthless. Like I don't know why I'm doing this to myself type thing. And so for me, it was more so like, oh man, how do I describe this? It was an awakening almost. it was like, okay, we have spent years starving and depriving yourself of mental and physical health. Like, we need to turn the light switch back on. So mine was definitely more of an awakening and a realization. So thank you.
Were there times when you wanted to pull the plug? Or just maybe like, give me
Okay.
something quick to make me go
Yes.
away?
Yes, absolutely. I remember how I felt, and I did not like that. So at times, I'd like try to quickly put my guard back up, and Carl would be like, "You're modeling again." Like, that's not. And that to me was just like shutting him out, you know, not, you know.
Your defense mechanism. in many
Yeah,
ways.
for sure. And yes, I definitely felt like, I'm like, okay, I'm done. After what, 4 or 5 hours, I'm like, I'm done. And, but for me specifically, I'm trying to think of the greater good of how it can impact others and others' support groups. And that's why I think you all are here. So thank you. But I went through it because I knew it was bigger than both you and I. It was more for the community, more to just share with one another, to feel with one another. And I think that's beautiful. So I suffered for those 5 hours. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, and I think that's interesting that you bring that up, because even amongst the participants, the experiences are varied in what you get out of it, but also how you see the value of your participation. And so I guess that's, it's sort of leading into what do you want the viewers to take away? Both, you, Carl, from having this, the genesis of this project and exposing in many ways people's private fears in a way that is at their most vulnerable point, and then going through that with here too, and many more, that experience. So I guess what are your hopes and dreams for the viewers? And you sort of touched on that a little bit.
Yeah, I guess I'll finish my thought on
Yeah,
that.
please do.
Pass it around. So initially, how I said, it was for body image for myself and others included. But as I worked on this project with Carl, I realized that in addition to that, the support group, so your family, your friends, your partners, anyone that's super close to you, needs to know how they can help you in an effective and positive way. Because my family was not that. My family's not the person or the people that I can go to and be like, hey, this is what I'm going through. I don't know where to start. Like, I needed someone that was able to even just ask me, are you okay? And no one said that. Everyone, to me especially, felt like they were just verbally attacking me, verbally attacking my body and my physique. And background, I'm Mexican, and I'm first generation, so my parents were born and raised in Mexico, so they still have that mentality that mental health doesn't exist. Yeah, so that's huge. And okay, to share some things that they would tell me, it'd be more so like, if you get any thinner, you'll look like a cancer patient. Like, instead of saying hi, I've been welcomed with, like, are you eating? Like, they were genuinely just curious as to, for that, not my own sake, like, oh, hey, how are you? My grandpa, for whatever reason, saw that I was losing all this weight. Give me a second. Okay, thank you. Oh my God, okay. And he told me, you're finally starting to look like a family. Nope, give me a second. You're finally starting to look like a member of this family. So that to me was like huge, because my family's not thin, and so to me I'm like laughing now because I'm like, I'm one of the thinnest ones here. So how dare you say that to me, but okay, that's fine. So I didn't have that support group that I want others to have, and so if you see someone or know someone that you think is in, I don't want to say in trouble, but in like need of physical and mental health, like I want people to know how to properly approach someone with this issue, and that to me was huge. Okay, I think I'm done.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I worked on this for a couple of years before showing it to anyone. Partly because when things are in their infancy, you know, before the there is firmly established, I didn't want the input, especially people whose opinion I would normally respect, to ask me questions and maybe throw off a path that I would have found legitimately. It was also a long time before I put any of these pictures were shown anywhere. By that I mean even like on a website, anything like that. So people were responding to this query that I had put out and agreeing to do that, not having seen anyone else who had ever done that. And for a long time I kept things down because I was afraid of a chilling effect. I was afraid that if people looked, I mean, some of these pictures are somewhat raw. People's guards are down, they're open, they're transparent, and you know, sometimes they're somewhat vulnerable. And I thought, if a prospective subject saw that, they would think, I'm not going to be, I'm not that. I'm not them. I'm not going up on that wall. And so I kept it hidden. Are you noticing a motif here?